Hello, curious. Ed Gein, also known as the Plainfield Butcher, went down in American history as a deranged collector of human body fragments, and while his name can be found on the list of America's most dangerous serial killers, the man was actually, not one at all. So what is the real story of Ed Gein, and how many victims has he actually had? And how was the terrifying legend of his crimes born, which was then inspired by a whole host of cult horror movies, such as The Silence of the Lambs, Psycho, and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre? Stay with us until the end for all the details about the life of the man who was capable of these terrifying acts, and just because he was obsessed with his mother. But before we move on, don't forget to click on the subscription button, turn on the notifications, and leave a like. Let's get started. In November of 1957, Bernice Warden, 58, went missing in the small town of Plainfield, Wisconsin, and she was the owner of a local hardware store, and everything indicated that it was as if she had been attacked. And among the customers who had been there shopping the previous day, the most suspicious thing that aroused was by Ed Gein, a freak who had lived in the remote area, and the police therefore decided to visit his farm. And you can guess that what they found there was beyond imagination. The Loner House was a horror museum filled with the brim of various parts of human bodies. There were skulls used as bedposts for serving or food bowls or anything like that, lampshades and chair seats made of human skin, various clothes such as leggings or belts were sewn from it, and perhaps the greatest horror was caused by the masks of human faces hanging on the wall. And Bernice Warden was also found dead, and the farm owner was immediately arrested. While some of the officers remained on the spot, making further terrifying finds, Ed Gein was taken to the police station where he did not agree to testify for many hours. And finally, when the photos of the last victim were spread out on the table in front of him, he decided that he would reveal his story and soon admitted that he had killed 2 people. So where did this enormous amount of macabre artifacts on his farm come from? Well, we're about to tell you in a moment, but first we recommend one of our earlier episodes about the last words of serial criminals. For example, what did Ted Bundy or Eileen Warnes say before the execution of their deaths? And who is terrified to even make the prison guards laugh with the last confession? Well, you can find out by clicking on the link displayed on your screen now. However, to explain how Gein decided to create a gruesome collection of human remains in his own home, we must start this story from the very beginning. And Ed, as a boy, was raised by an alcoholic father and an overbearing mother. And it was she who, through discipline and punishment and humiliation, shaped the character of her sons and made great efforts to keep her older Henry and younger Ed away from girls that she considered to be the greatest threat. And nevertheless, the younger Gein idolized his mother while hating his brother as the main rival for parental love. And the disagreement between them ended when Henry passed away from this world under the rather mysterious circumstances. He died during a fire in the fields near the family farm, and the police discovered wounds on the boy's head, which might have indicated a serious beating that was the cause of death and not the accident. Ed was delighted that he had a mother all to himself, but this happiness did not last long because the woman fell ill with cancer and she left this world. It was a real blow to the young boy who, out of despair, retreated into himself and began to lead a life of a hermit. He avoided contact with other people and was considered a freak in the town, although it was mentioned that a few years earlier he had aroused general sympathy by helping his neighbors with small household chores and even taking care of their children. And that's why no one thought of his loneliness after his mother's death could turn into madness, and yet it happened. Ed, living alone on the farm, used only a small bedroom and kitchen, leaving the rest of the rooms untouched to serve as kind of a sanctuary in honor of the deceased mother. It was the perfect order. While in the 2 rooms Ed occupied, it was exactly the opposite. The boy also began to become morbidly interested in cemeteries, and then digging up bodies of elderly women, wishing that his mother would return in any form. Using their skin, he sewed clothes that then he used to disguise himself as a woman, and because of his tendency, he was later called the Buffalo Bill by investigators. And we're referring to the Wild Wild West and the scalping of people by Indians. In this way, Ed Gein also became an inspiration for one of the characters created by the Thomas Harris in the book of The Silence of the Lambs, which was later transferred to the screens, and the film adaptation is still considered a cult today. And thanks to The Silence of the Lambs, Ed Gein literally gained immortality, but when he collected fragments of the deceased bodies at home, he did not strive for fame at all. He spent most of his time on the farm, where he claimed at night he heard his mother's voice and could see the faces of people watching him all around. Even then, he hung masks and made human faces made of the skin and bones that he dug out of the graves of people, and he made decorations, fittings for furnitures and utensils. And no one from the townspeople discovered this dark secret, and when Gein took up odd jobs to earn food, he even aroused trust because he undertook the hardest jobs and he was reliable and hardworking. After a while, it got loud in Plainfield because of the disappearance of Mary Hogan, the owner of a local pub. The police managed to establish that she had just been kidnapped from the premises, but the trail was broken in a nearby parking lot. And all the weeks of searching turned up with nothing, and the investigation was eventually suspended. But once the case was quiet, another shocking news came about Bernice Warden, who had disappeared from her hardware store under similar circumstances. And this time, as we said at the beginning of the episode, the cops found the suspect and ended up at Ed Gein's farm. And there, in a terrible mess among hundreds of fragments of the dead, the bodies of Bernice Warden and Mary Hogan were discovered. The trial of Gein began in 1958, and during the first hearing, the court decided that the man would be locked up in a guarded institution for the mentally ill, and he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. An expert psychiatrist called in witnesses that concluded that Gein was incapable of taking responsibility for his actions. He was delusional, and he thought that he could raise the dead, and he saw nothing wrong with it taking the lives of the two women in the town. He claimed that he did this because they looked very much like his mother, and he was looking for ways to replace her, and he needed company as well. And when he was admitted to the mental hospital, he did not cause any problems. He was calm and quiet. After 10 years, the doctors decided that Gein could stand trial again, and there was a trial in which he was found guilty of 2 crimes to which he confessed to himself, while at the same time found to be insane. And as a result, he was not serving his sentence in prison, but rather a psychiatric hospital. While he was locked up, his farm was attracting hundreds of curious reporters, and the news of the gruesome finds spread throughout the country, and Plainfield was under a real siege. And it was then that the legend of Ed Gein was born, the insane corpse collector. And although the man was proven to have 2 crimes and the investigations established that the rest of the bodies on the farm were from dug graves, the press still attributed him to dozens of other murders and kidnappings throughout Wisconsin. And Gein had acquired the label of a serial criminal, and when his property and personal belongings were to be auctioned off, interest exceeded all expectations. Unfortunately, before any sale was made, the farm burned down, possibly due to arson. And while Gein died in 1984, another wave of his admirers returned to Plainfield, and even happened to be his tombstone was stolen by one of the amateurs of horror, and that cult prevailed around Ed and was almost difficult to comprehend. His macabre artifacts from the human bodies captured the imaginations so much that songs were written about him, and over time, the man's story served as an inspiration for books and films. And we have already mentioned The Silence of the Lambs, but this list also includes productions such as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Psychoposes, or The American Psycho, where the main character even quotes Gein's words during the recorded trial. Although the criminal is still called one of America's most famous serial killers, many other people consider this to be incorrect because in order to become one, you must, according to the terminology, kill 3 or more people, which Gein has never been proven. So the fact is, however, that the criminal is still considered a true icon to the history of the forensics. So, tell me, curious, did you know of this true story? And did you know that it inspired some of the cult horror movies? Please let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to click on the subscription button so we can hear back from you soon. Until next time.